Alright everybody, welcome to the secret history living in your neighborhood? Neighborhood pond? Aquarium? Alright, so what I wanted to talk to you guys about today is something a little different than normal. So here we are in Columbus, Ohio, outside of Columbus. A lot of this was farmland until the 1980s. And out here in the Midwest, Rust Belt, whatever you want to call it, the near east to us in the Pacific Northwest, the Great Lakes region, all through this area, it's prone to tornadoes, flash flooding, things like that. Now, Columbus doesn't get a ton of them, but they do get some pretty wicked thunderstorms that will roll through, and they will cause quite a bit of ruckus and quite a bit of water to the point where this low-lying area can flood all the way up to where these trees are for several hours and collect. So what was the solution? Well, they built these ponds. They're retention ponds. That's not a new idea. It's nothing amazing or that interesting. However, what I do find a bit interesting is some of the aquaculture that went into this, and it was all very experimental. From talking to some of the locals, including some contractors who are actually working on putting in new ponds here and making more sizable lakes. Actually, they're working quite a bit on making lakes for the whole area. Now, these lakes are full of fish. I hope you guys can see this. I know it's a little harder to see than what I'm seeing here, but what we have here we have all sorts of bass, bluegill, crappie, and we've also got, let's try to, out here you got a good population of them. It looks like some perch maybe, and we're gonna try feeding them here. Look at that. Wow, man, they just go for it. So these are clearly fairly tame little fish, and look at that. They're coming from all over. Some good-sized bluegills coming through. There's also appears to be either pumpkin seed fish maybe, or some sort of sunfish, and a good amount of bullfrogs. Now, the aquaculture that I was talking about that comes in, that happens to be, so you get these ponds, and all of a sudden you get algae. You just get a ton of algae. You get because it gets hot. It gets up to, right now it's a good 90. It's 94 today, and humid. And look at the size of that one that just took it. We've got beautiful orange markings on this one, and we've got blue fins on the side. Some of these are getting pretty good for size for this lake, and they're definitely not exhibiting their natural behavior. Somebody's coming here and feeding these fish a lot, because we're just getting swarms of bluegill here. I mean, there's at least 100 ready right here to eat whatever I want to serve them up, which is kind of cool, kind of fun. In Washington, they're definitely not like this at all. So what they did when they started putting in these lakes, and they realized, oh man, they're just turning into these algae slush puddles and gross ponds, is they started putting fish and snails and freshwater clams and all sorts of critters into these lakes to kind of keep it an ecosystem rather than just a plot of water that just is gross and stagnant. And so then, people do out here, just as they do everywhere, enjoy fishing. And so they decided they'd bring some bass in, and some perch, and some catfish. Well, those are all popular for game fishing. And those did well. They actually survive in a small pond this size, right? So that worked out. So then they brought in some bigger catfish, and that worked out. You see all these? I hope you guys can see these. There are just a ton of these bluegills. Usually one kind of has a territory. See, they're getting braver coming towards where I've put a breadcrumb trail, but they're really hitting that water pretty good. I would venture to say that this is probably a pretty good sporting fish around here if you were a kid or just wanted to catch some little stuff. But So what they did was they kind of have like accidentally figured this all out over the years. So in this neighborhood in particular, started out with they had these, they had these ponds, and like I said, they put a couple fish in so that people could fish, and it was kind of a sales point. Plus, it's always nice to see fish in there and helps keep the mosquitoes down. Well, so then they put in snails. Now, some of the snails are probably not what you or I would have chosen. They're these big freshwater snails that are like the size of a frickin' softball. Look at all the, I don't know, I hope you guys can see these, but look at all the fish in there, all the bluegills. And they're following me along the banks. They're real interested in what I'm up to. So while that's going on, we're gonna keep walking. I am getting bit up by mosquitoes, but we've got, look at this, a horde of over 100 of these bluegills just following me along. I really hope that shows up. And to show you that they're keeping pace with me, I'll throw some bread out, and I'm sure they'll nail it like there's no tomorrow. Yeah. So, and they nailed the other fish that got it. So let's throw a little more out and just see. And by the way, people, don't feed your fish bread all the time. It's no good. I'm on the move, limited to what means I have to show you. But so they started doing that, and most of the algae was getting taken care of half the time. In the heat of the summer, you get what we're going to see over here. And this is what happens when you don't have oxygenated water, and when the water becomes half Miller Lite or whatever the heck this is. No, and there's all sorts of, you can see here, this is just really bad. But there are snails, there are crayfish, crawfish, whatever you want to call them, living in here. Lots of geese. Now the geese are adding a whole lot of ammonia, nitrogen, and nastiness to this body of water. However, it's connected to these storm drains, and when there are floods, there is a river called the Scioto River. Check this out. So these aren't bluegills here. These are something else. These are little bass or something like that. Look like little smallmouth bass fry or something like that. Let's see. Are they even going to go for the bread? So all sorts of things like turtles, snapping turtles, box turtles, red-eared sliders, pretty much anything that's been a pet you're going to find in these ponds too, as well as wasps and hornets and things. But in any case, so they're connected, and as things flood, more species come out of the woodwork and end up in these local ponds. So when the algae was getting bad in the summer, what they started doing is adding more actual plants, Ludwigia, Rotala, water lilies in some cases, although they don't like how dominant those become oftentimes. And they start adding that to the water, which helps oxygenate the water, helps clean the water, and it works out pretty well. It's just like your fish tank. You can see the feathers and the slicks of duck poo, or I think it's probably geese poo. Now here you can guess that there's almost certainly a turtle or some other critter, probably a turtle in this part of the state, because the water has been disrupted very recently, and there's also bubbles coming up, not just from sulfur or whatever it may be down there. So over here on this bank, we're going to see if in the shaded side, where it's a little deeper, if we can find some other side. And on these little ponds there that were put in, here's unfortunately a very sick bluegill. It looks like it has maybe Colmenares. Oh, it has dropsy, I bet. It's got an infection on its skin. Its eye is bulging out. Here it is. And that's just a bummer to see. But it happens in the wild, just like it does in your fish tank. And I guess that's just life. But over here, we're going to feed a couple because I feel like we should. You see them strike that. These guys are eager. But in this water, which, as I showed you over here, is all, filled with an obscene amount of duck poo and nitrites and things, that can kill the pond real quick. It can kill all the fish and everything as well. Instead of restocking all the time, they started planting plants like these, like this Ludwigia, different sword grasses and things like that, cattails, things that can live immersed. And that has led to the lake or pond, whatever you want to call it, having a ever transforming, movable, I guess, water line, as it were. And you get all sorts of things like bullfrogs. We might see them leaping here in a minute. I see frogs leaping right ahead. And there's some fish in here too, some smaller fish, some little fry of something as well. And so it's kind of interesting. All these mosquitoes are on this side too, so there's definitely a different micro system. But look at the size of these snails. I mean, compared to my finger, they're large water snails. Also, I see invasive different clams and zebra mussels, stuff that's in the Great Lakes. Pretty much anything that made it through the Great Lakes is here in the Columbus area in the fresh water. But the next thing they realized was, well, this thing's basically a big fish tank, so let's aerate it. And since they've aerated it, it's really helped, according to the locals and the folks who built this place, it's really helped keep the algae back. So along with, we got some bass coming up there and more bluegills. But there's just a beautiful bluegill. Let's see if we can get him to surface closer. Beautiful bluegills here that they're competitive. So I don't know if they're just hungry because there isn't a ton of food here, but they strike pretty good. And, you know, for a kid or just a hobbyist bored, that would be a fun little fish to catch. Now this is one of the smaller lakes here. There's another little pond over here. I would guess has the same fish in it, but I haven't checked yet, so I was gonna wander over there and find out. These grounds are actually kept up pretty well too. And you know, people live right here, so they don't want crazy mosquitoes all the time. And just me walking here, you can see how many frogs and tadpoles and fish, just all sorts of critters, are living in the banks. They kick up, see it's clear up ahead, foggy here, and it'll be, here comes all those sunfish, bluegills, if you will, coming in. And like I said, when it flash floods, that's how they get into the next pond over. And the birds come and eat the fish, and it's just become a really cool ecosystem. And instead of building the cement retention ponds that are just so stagnant, this is a really great way to kind of bring a little more life and less muck and algae. There is a lot of algae here. That's mostly because of the geese, but more than the geese, I mean, out of natural factors, geese are what are causing this. Is a large amount of geese, and this water's not constantly being changed by a creek or anything. This is real stagnant water. But there is man-made intervention on these bodies of water, and you get to, here come some more of those bluegills, sunfish. They're really bright orange here with really blue gills and tails, which is cool, and a nice eye spot on the side, following me all the way to the end, I guess. And the frogs are jumping, the cattails, and all sorts of immersed plants going on here. So I see some hygrophillia. None of this is really tropical, although it is 95 today. But the catfish, they'll stay in the deeper water. And that aeration over there is enough to keep it going. This pipe here is a way that they get out. And when you take a look over on this side, you can see this is even a bigger lake, but it's kind of been bottomed out. It's for when it rains really hard, thunderstorms here. But all of this is just part of, you know, aquaculture. And the more diverse that they've made these things, the more plants they add, the more crustaceans and bivalves, the better it seems to do, since there's not really a baseline here for what should, I mean, nothing should be in these lakes indigenously unless they're connected to the river. And now these things are connected to the river in roundabout ways to the Scioto River that flows through the heart of Ohio. But you can actually see out here, we've got all sorts of bigger fish, some bass and some perch out there. And so it's just kind of a mystery what's in every pond. They may have stocked it 30 years ago. One neighborhood association may have picked one thing. I was looking on a map and I started counting, and I found that I found well over 100 of these within about 20 miles of here that were of this size. The one I was just at didn't really even show up on the map very well on Google Maps. So just kind of interesting. Here we got some water lilies. Let's check it out. Looks like it may be a Nymphaea species of some sort. I can't really tell. Looks like we got some bullfrogs. The water's edge is not clear either. You see all the, I'm getting eaten alive by mosquitoes, but you can see the frogs leap just ahead of me coming near the edge of the water. If I take a step down, watch this, you'll see them take off, jumping around. But there's some nice aquatic plants here. There's some red leaf Bluegill. There's also moss, believe it or not. There is algae on top, but there is some sort of moss in there. And there's actually crypts in the water, which is unexpected. I feel like that has to be someone did a tank cleaning and flushed it down the waste bin or something. But I actually see nice crypts out here. Can you guys make these out? There's some nice cryptocorin plants out here. We'll see if anything bigger than the little bluegills surfaces here for us. But in here, there are smaller minnows as well, and there's tadpoles, signs of bullfrogs. Out here we get deer too. But I hear people fish in these little lakes. They don't necessarily eat them, just catch and release kind of thing. But just that aeration is enough to keep the fish doing their thing. And I guess a few times in the past in different parts of the neighborhood, because there's about a dozen of these in this neighborhood altogether, they've accidentally killed off a lot of the fish and things by trying to kill algae. And it turns out it was from yard fertilizer and things like that they were using locally, just on everybody's yards here, the homeowner association. So they've learned to cut the phosphates down, the nitrites down, and this is just a really nice plant. I guess now that I can see it clearer without the sun in my eyes. There goes a big bullfrog. American bullfrog, I believe. Yep, there it goes. So this is not actually any sort of water lily. I don't know what it is, but it's kind of a cool plant. And if you guys know what it is, please comment down below. I would appreciate that. I'm just interested. You can see there's actual deer hoof prints here where they've come down to eat. I am getting eaten alive by mosquitoes, even though it's still sunny out. Out here,